Tipping culture around delivery driving has been a super hot topic, especially when you involve robots. Uber Eats driver says robot delivery bots are being developed as a response to tipless orders no one picks up. This is a very unique subject I'm going to talk about, not only when it comes to, of course, robots and AI taking over jobs, whether it's self-driving cars, or in this case, robots delivering, which I have seen here in LA, but also the tipping culture around delivery driving. The biggest thing, as you can see here, is a massive number of orders sit undelivered for hours because drivers often won't deliver without a tip up front, which I think is kind of interesting. I will talk about that in a second. This is one TikToker who posted, and delivery driver as well, posted about this in terms of Uber Eats, DoorDash, Postmates, etc., etc. The biggest thing when it comes to these robot systems and developing them, according to him, is tipping practices. As you're here, they're spending millions of dollars to create these robots because delivery drivers are not taking these non-tip orders. And like I mentioned in the beginning, and as I mentioned, some of these orders sit there for hours and hours because drivers do not want to pick them up because they didn't tip initially. And this isn't the first time, this is on the Daily Dot. The Daily Dot is covered. This is Justin. Let me get his full name. Justin, just make that money. This is a TikTok handle, to give him a shout out. What's interesting though is I've seen this a lot on Reddit and other sites. A lot of drivers are complaining who do delivery drives that they get tons of orders that don't tip in the beginning. And some of them do tip afterwards, but obviously you never know. And what's tricky is for a lot of them, they say, look, unless you tip right away, I'm not gonna bring the order to you. Which I'm gonna be honest, I feel mixed about. I know I might get some hate for this. I think it's always important to look at both sides, and I'll talk about that in a second. But as he says right here, that's the only way they're actually gonna get their food is if they tip in the beginning, or pretty much right away. In addition, and this is true for not only delivery drivers, but rideshare drivers, and in this comment section, they have stated, and a lot of people have stated, and it's grown more difficult to make money as a delivery driver. DoorDash lower pay even more. They no longer pay anything extra on stack orders, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's getting a lot worse in terms of the pay structures. But one viewer suggests, this is where things get very tricky, right? And not only, I think there's two unique elements to this article of one, using robots and AI taking over, which is now almost becoming a Black Mirror episode with ChatGPT and everything. But then on the other side, you're talking about the unique tipping culture of delivery driving, which is the most unique tipping culture out of any service industry job, so to speak, because you can see here, one viewer suggested automatic gratuity, implement 15 to 20% gratuity on all orders. But then that's kind of a tricky thing as well. They'd rather spend millions of dollars creating a robot instead of just raising the base pay, which is 100% true. Now, like I said, in this article, you mainly have two different things going on. You have the whole AI taking over, so to speak, and robots taking over, and then you have the whole tipping culture. On this kind of recap, just giving my own thoughts, I'm mostly going to talk about the tipping culture. Maybe I'll do a video in the future talking about AI taking over. I did do a video, I think it was last year. First time ever I saw this. This is now becoming more popular in LA. I was walking down the street and I saw this robot driving by, and I'm like, okay, it's kind of weird. Maybe it's a school project, I don't know. And the robot had a name. Turns out this robot was doing deliveries, where the robot would go to the restaurant, they'd have some code entered, this flap would open, they put the meal inside of the robot, flap would close, and it would drive off. And it was a completely self-driving robot. Like, me and the robot waited to cross the street together when the light was green or whatever. And I'm like, am I really waiting with the robot? And then it turned red or whatever so we could cross, or let us cross. And I was like, okay, you can go. I'm just, so it's kind of weird, right? Definitely a Black Mirror style thing. But in terms of tipping culture, it's gotten very interesting. I'm going to be honest, because I see a lot of complaints from delivery drivers saying, look, they're not tipping in the beginning. This is BS. I'm not going to pick up an order, especially a non-tipless order, unless everything's up front. And I got to be honest, I look at this from two different angles. And I think it's always important to look at things from both sides, because if you think about it, I know a lot of delivery drivers do complain about this, and I'm going to be honest, I did delivery driving once. I literally did only one order. I got tipped very well on that order, I will say. I personally hated delivery driving. I know a lot of people though who love it. You don't have to talk to anybody. You could just put in music. You're kind of doing your own thing. You don't have to worry about your car being super, super clean, all this kind of stuff. There's a lot of pros and cons, especially when you compare, like, say, delivery driving to rideshare driving. However, delivery driving is really the only service industry, like I said, the only service industry job, that you tip up front, which is really interesting. Now, for me as a consumer, as someone, like, say, who sometimes orders Uber Eats, I don't do it a lot, but when I have, I'd say 75% of the time, or 3 out of 4 times, no issue. The driver comes, super polite, super courteous. They drop the food off, no big deal. I'd say about a quarter of the times, though, a huge portion of my meal is missing. There's been times I've gotten like an order and the entire meal is a gigantic mess. It almost seemed like they took the bag and just tipped it upside down. There's been times where, everything was super mixed. Like, basically that I get my order and either something's missing, something's mixed up. Like, I got the wrong order. That's happened numerous times where someone delivered the completely wrong order, and now I have to contact the service company and blah, blah, blah. And here's what gets tricky is, for me, I always tip 20% up front. Always. No questions asked. Sometimes even more if it's like easy to round it to a little bit more. I've always been a big tipper. I think that's true for anybody who's been in the service industry, especially for me being a former bartender. I've always been a big tipper. But I will say, I'm going to be honest, and some people might not like to hear this, there are some really bad delivery drivers out there. There's been some horrible delivery drivers that I've gotten where I, like, say, order a meal and, like, say, get a milkshake. The order comes, they leave. I already tipped them, right? I already tipped them because I tipped in advance. And then I hit him up and I say, hey, do you know what the milkshake is? And then he's like, oh, sorry, it's in my front console. And I'm like, okay, well, can you come back? He's like, oh, I'll come back in like 30 minutes or an hour. And I'm like, well, by that point, the milkshake will be kind of cold. And he's like, well, sorry, bro, like, just contact Uber Eats, right? And on one end, yeah, it's just a milkshake. But on the other end, if you're in the service industry and part of your job is to do that, well, to me, that deserves less of a tip, right? Now, I know some people may hate me for saying this, but if you think about it, it would be weird. Like, say if you come and I'm bartending and you say, hey, can I get a whiskey sour? Can I get an old fashioned? Can I get a gin and tonic? And I say, yeah, can you give me a tip, by the way, before I make your drink? You'd be like, no, I'm going to wait for you to make the drink because, like, say I mess up your drink. Like, say I give you the wrong thing. Like, say I'm a huge jerk to you as a bartender. Like, say I just have horrible customer service. Yeah, you still might tip me, which I think you should, right? 15 or 20%, but you might not tip me as much, right? The tip is both, I think, two things in one. It's both, one, almost as standard practice, 15 to 20%, because that's what you have to do when going out. But two, it's also indicative of the customer service you get. There's been some times I've tipped 30 or 40 or 50% to a bartender because they went above and beyond the call of practice and everything. When it comes to delivery driving, it is tricky. Like, I've even seen some delivery drivers online complain like, oh my God, it's such BS. When people tip 20%, they should be tipping 30%. And on one end, I do agree that you should be getting paid more, but I don't know if it should come out of the customer's pockets, right? This is definitely a huge issue with Uber Eats and Doordash and everything. But I think the bigger thing, if you look at the bigger picture, and I think this is what kind of causes the chicken before the egg type paradox, is delivery driving, like I said, is the only place where you tip beforehand. I don't know if you're a good delivery driver or not, and people might not like to hear this, but the harsh truth is this: there's a lot of bad delivery drivers out there. And like I said, I've gotten numerous bad ones where I'm like, wow, I tip this guy 25% or even 30% because, I can see that this restaurant's a bit farther from me. I, of course, when it comes to driving for Lyft and Uber, know what it's like to deal with the BS of dealing with people. I'm going to tip them a lot because I really appreciate what they're doing. And they bring me their order. It looks like they just threw everything in a bag and like shook the bag up like this. There's stuff everywhere. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but this does not deserve a 30% tip, right? And it is tricky, right? It is tricky because on the other end, when it comes to delivery driving, I think, yes, tipping up front is important because the last thing you want to do is go pick up an order. You do all this work to go pick up the order, you get the right stuff, you bring it to the customer's house, and then they don't tip you afterwards. That's, of course, happened to me numerous times when driving for Uber and Lyft, where you pick somebody up, you drop them off, and you get no tip, right? But like I said, it would be weird if, like, say, someone orders an Uber, I go to pick them up, and I say, hey, before I pick you up, you got to tip me right now. Before I even drop you off, you have to tip me. If, let's say, I'm a massage therapist, and tipping is very common in the massage therapy world, and someone comes and I say, hey, by the way, you have to tip me before I give you a massage. Or if someone comes to my restaurant and I'm their waiter or waitress and I say, hey, you have to give me 20% of your projected order right now before I even bring it to you because, sorry, I'm just not going to serve you at all. You'd be like, what do you mean you're not going to serve me until I tip you before it? You've not done anything yet, right? And I think this is what caused the tricky issue because on one end, I see where delivery drivers are coming from. They're getting paid way less, and this huge tipping issue is massive because a lot of people will order an order, not understanding all the work that goes into it. And let's say it's pouring rain outside. Someone brings, like, say, the order to their house in an apartment complex, and their apartment's number 504, and they have to go inside and do all this stuff just to get to their door. They leave and they get no tip. That's messed up. But on the other end, if I ever look at both sides and be as objective as possible, I do see where some other people are coming from, where they're like, well, why would I tip you when I don't know if I'm getting my order correctly? Or let's say in a perfect world, if every order you get is perfectly brought to your place, of course, I think everybody would tip. But I'd say for me, like I said, I very rarely order Uber Eats. But when I have, like I said, about 1 out of every 4 times, I get a really negative experience. Then I have to contact Uber Eats, and usually they do refund me, but sometimes they haven't. Sometimes I contact them saying, hey, the driver messed up. They did this, this, and this. I didn't get this item. They're like, sorry, we understand you didn't get your item that you ordered and you tipped your driver ahead of time, and your driver forgot it in their car or forgot it at the restaurant, but we're actually still not going to reimburse you for that item. And I'm like, so basically I paid this amount for nothing, and now do I have to contact my credit card company for fraud? Because, it's a tricky thing. So not all drivers are perfect. So I got to be honest, I do understand where some consumers are coming from, where they're like, hey, I am going to tip you, right? Like, I feel like a lot of people do go into it with the mindset of, oh, I am going to tip you, but I'm going to wait, right? It makes sense. If you bring me my order and it's not that well made, if you leave something in your car or whatever, why would I tip you a huge tip? Maybe I'll just tip you only 10 or 15% as opposed to 15, 20, or 25%. This is a tricky thing, I think, and it really only exists in delivery driving if you really think about it, right? It really only exists in this space. And there's been a lot of things going about, like I said here, or like they said in the article, one person suggested adding on an automatic tip. I don't think that's a good idea because the accounting can get very weird. And I feel like that might not be classified as a tip, as more as as just like a payment or whatever to you rather than a tip, which is classified a little bit different accounting wise. So, or maybe part of your hourly rate or something. So I don't think that's a solution. And then of course, when it comes to DoorDash and Uber Eats, I know when it comes to this one TikToker, Justin, who stated that, they're developing robots to overcome non-tipping orders and everything. I actually don't think that's it. I think just for a lot of companies, they're looking at AI or robots or whatever as a way to pay people less. I really think that's it. I don't think it's DoorDash CEOs and employees or people high up saying, you know what, people are not picking up orders that don't tip, so we're going to use robots. I think that robots, when it comes to delivery driving, and this could be a whole separate video, which I'll probably do maybe a follow-up. I think the thing with robots is it's way less risky using a robot. Like, what's the worst that happens when it comes to a robot delivering the food to your house? The fries aren't there, or the milkshake isn't there, or something's too cold. No big deal. When it comes to a self-driving car, you're talking about potential life or death. If, like, say, something goes wrong, you're talking about potential injuries, you're talking about hitting other cars, which is this huge insurance issue. The tricky landscape of self-driving cars, especially with humans on the road and vehicles on the road and everything, is massive. When it comes to delivery driving, I think it's way less risky. And so I think that's why for a lot of companies, they're saying, okay, if we're going to look at, do we develop robots to deliver a burger or develop robots to drive somebody from point A to point B and navigate not just a sidewalk, but navigate, let's say, an entire road with different lights going on and stop signs and people walking away and jaywalkers and blah, blah, blah. Of course, a delivery robot, way easier. So there's a lot to this whole article that is kind of opening up Pandora's box. But I think at the end of the day, I think that the whole robot situation isn't a result of the tipping issue. I think it's a result of them saying, look, it's a very low barrier to entry to test out AI and robots to see if we can use them as opposed to actual people, right? On the other end, though, when it comes to this whole tipping issue, like I said, I feel mixed about it. I don't think there's like a right or wrong answer, at least to me personally, because it's very easy, I think, on one end, especially for me being a former bartender and driving for Lyft and Uber and everything, it's very easy for me to say, oh, this is BS. People should tip, no questions asked. But it's like, well, on the other end, though, from a consumer's perspective, I do get like, well, it really is the only industry period, and correct me if I'm wrong, maybe I'm forgetting one, but it's really the only industry that you tip before the service happens. And if you're in the service industry, and I say this for me as a bartender, if like say I'm making someone a drink and I horribly mess up, and this has happened to me before, I'll be honest. There's one time I was making a drink, a girl's in front of me, and I spilled it on her. Horrible, right? And it wasn't like a clear drink. It had like, I can't remember what it was. I think it was like a grenadine type drink or whatever. So there was like grenadine in it, there's Coke. It was really bad. I gave her the drink for free. And then I remember she's like, hey, like, I'm sorry, I'm just gonna take the drink and go. She didn't tip me. And I'm like, you know what? You're right. I don't deserve a tip. I messed up. I definitely messed up, right? And for me as a delivery driver, if I like say messed up really, really bad, I don't think I should deserve a huge tip. I'll be honest, right? Like I said, I've only done one Uber Eats order, but let's say if I ever went back into delivery driving and I really messed up an order bad, I would not expect to get a tip because I shouldn't, right? And it's tricky because you do tip before the customer service, before the service happens, and you're in the customer service industry. It is a tricky thing, I think, overall. Honestly, I don't know what the solution is. Let me know what you think in the comments. I know some people might heavily disagree with me on this because I know there's a lot of posts online on, like I said, Reddit and other forums and other sites of people saying, oh, this is BS. People should tip right away. I've even seen, like I said, a lot of people saying, oh, 20% is not enough. You got to tip your delivery driver 25% or else you're not getting your order. And it's like, I get that angle because, of course, you're not making that much money. And I think people should tip a delivery driver, especially, like, say, if it's snowing or it's raining out. But on the other end, there's a lot of bad delivery drivers out there. Some people might not want to hear that. And if you're a bad delivery driver, should you actually get a good tip? Tough to say.